So, in addition to what I was saying before, that in the last video was cut off pretty short, I saved this man's daughter's life while I was married to her. And I was always there for her in any way that I could be, but I made mistakes too. Mistakes that he's trying to rake me over the coals for, while ignoring and avoiding his own. Pretending like he's just a decent person, when in reality he's not. And I'm going to get into why, because it's actually important for me to address these problems vocally. He wrote nothing. Effectively, I wrote a bunch of green language, which is something that, if you don't know what it is, just look it up. Just look up the phrase green language. And I did that on my phone at one point, not realizing how much I hated him at the time, not realizing how greedy he really was. And he's been trying to exploit me for a very long time at this point, while calling me trash, while being incredibly abusive, while being just a little disappearing clown boy. And the man that I saved his daughter from isn't in prison only because of this, quote, man who wants to exploit me for his own greed and his own desire for power. Dave Withers is his name, and he wants to go be a politician based upon nothing that he's actually done of his own merit and everything that I've done. I put Xena Shrek in prison for being a pedophile, an active pedophile. That's not in the news headlines, because it's not, but she is in prison. And in addition to that, there's other stuff that I've done that he knows about, aside from the green language. And other stuff that I, have written about, other stuff that I've exposed. A whole lot of stuff that he's very interested in building a career of his own around that has nothing to do with him. And effectively, his whole game is to try to capitalize on me in his own way, while making money off of me, while pretending to be a good person, while being abusive, while being manipulative, while being psychologically effectively, he's been studying my life from a distance for quite some time. Every last piece of it, every last piece of anything he can find, he's dug up my background, he's dug up all of my social connections, he's infiltrated my family history. He's been searching through everything he can for many reasons, mostly because he's greedy and wants to find anything else he can find, which he's never going to. He wants to be a politician. It's not going to happen. And the reason why this is all stuff that makes me so angry, aside from the obvious, is he's basically just a guy who abandoned his own daughter for 30 plus years and her mother. And then he has the ego and the gall to come about my life and not only see everything that I was doing and everything that I was creating and everything that I had already done, but also he had the gall to go through my possessions without my permission, sources of information that I collected, that I put in the trunk of my car, that after a certain point he gave himself the right to search through without my permission, without speaking to me about it. He just hoped that I wouldn't notice, I guess. And the reason why he did all of that is because he has greedy eyes for power and money and control. Just like he's had greedy eyes for power and control over my life and everything in my life and everything around the lives of my family and friends, while searching my background and doing anything he can do to fuck with me in any way that he can. And he's made my life a miserable thing for quite some time. He tried to frame me with the coloring book, which drove my paranoia. So it made me very paranoid. He tried to frame me with the coloring book at my own house. And it made me paranoid to the point where I fled states and ended up having to sleep on a garage floor for like 6 months, because I was so paranoid that he was going to try to frame me again if I just went outside and got a job. So I stayed in a garage mostly for about 6 months, because in my head I knew that it was going to be next to impossible to actively frame me if I was there and never left. And while that was going on, I actually called him on the phone. And during that phone conversation, because he's been monitoring me for quite some time, and he still was at the time, he actually had the gall to say that I was mentally disturbed and insecure while I was sleeping on a garage floor only because of him. And he knew that that was what was going on in my life. And he's been gathering up as much money as he can to profit off of me for quite some time at this point. He's been stealing my... He's been trying to pick my brain about politics and anything else he can, military shit, anything else he can from a distance. He's been trying to manipulate me at every turn. And this is something I live with every day. It's everywhere I go. He's stolen ideas from me, actively. He still does, every day. Not only like plot devices for fiction that I was going to write one day, but also green language that I've written. Plenty of other things. And on top of all of that, he's also trying to twist my arm to not only working for the government, or, if not the government, he's trying to twist my arm into staying in America so that he can spy on me digitally for the rest of my life and steal as much as he can. For his own greed and his own drive to be in some position of power. And this is something that I never invited into my life. He wasn't even part of my life until he was in the background without my invitation or my knowledge for quite some time. I never gave him permission for any of this to happen in my life. And yet it is. And I've suffered quite a bit because of him. My life has been pretty shit since the timeline lines up in which he actually entered it, which isn't coincidence. He's a bad person. And my process of addressing this has to stop with the rhetoric, because this is stuff that I think about every day, mostly. Like, almost every day, for the most part, is what I mean. It has to stop with the rhetoric and get to the point where I actually start addressing the effects and the root issues as to why it's something that repeats in my head every day, or almost every day, or often, to the point where it is something that I get emotionally violent about as well, in my own way, because of his emotional violence. I can't keep doing it because it is making my life an absolute living hell. And I was a pretty happy guy before he ever entered my life. I really was. I was a pretty happy and peaceful guy before he had entered my life. At least peaceful in my day to day. Not so much anymore. And it's his fault.